Hey, good evening, Midwest Survivor. Time for dinner chat. So, first off, I want to say thank you to everybody that has subscribed to the channel thus far. We are at 32 subscribers. We are 18 subscribers. We're 32 away from 50. Once we hit 50, we're going to do that big giveaway. First prize, second prize, third prize, and then the first 50 will win something and also be included in the drawing for the first prize, second prize, third prize. So more information to follow on that. And as you can tell, I am driving. I am going on a trip. So dinner chat tonight is being brought to you by The Road. So tonight's dinner chat is why you keep hoping they'll change. And I typed this out this morning while I was on break at work, so bear with me. So, when hope keeps you holding on. So, hope is an amazing, powerful thing. I love the line in Shawshank Redemption where Andy Dufresne talks to Red in the letter that hope is a wonderful thing, the best of things. And, we put so much focus on hope. We keep hoping that people will change. You've seen the behavior. You've heard the promises. You've accepted apologies. You've given another chance. And you keep giving others and more and more and more. And you keep telling yourself, maybe this is the time they'll change. Maybe they'll finally understand. Maybe they'll comprehend that things are different. Maybe losing me will wake them up. Maybe if I love them enough, they'll change. And hope, it normally is a beautiful thing. But sometimes hope can keep us attached to the future version of someone while ignoring the person that is standing in front of us today. And that's what I'm trying to open up and talk to you about tonight. So, one reason we keep hoping is because we remember the beginning. They were attentive, they were affectionate, they were interested, they were supportive, and maybe they made you feel seen in a way that nobody had ever done before. And that's when things changed. So, instead of evaluating the relationship, and thinking about what it could be, what it should be, maybe you should realize and understand what it really is. You weren't necessarily holding on to the relationship you had. You were waiting for the relationship that you always wanted and remembered to come back to you. And, you fall in love with potential. And that's another easy trap to fall into. So many people have, let me set this over here. So many people have potential that, they think that, if they would just get help, if they just dealt with the past. Set this up a little better. There we go. There we go. They set themselves up for such failures. If they stop drinking, if they stop doing drugs, if they learn to communicate, if is just two letters, but it holds such powerful connotation. If I finally stood up to their family, and maybe you're right, maybe they could become different, but relationships aren't built on potential. They're built on patterns, and you have to ask yourself, am I loving the person they consistently are, or the person that I'm hoping that they'll someday become? And that is a difficult question, but it's a very important one. And promises create hope. After a major argument or a painful incident, sometimes something happens. They apologize, they cry, they promise, I'll change, I'll get counseling. I'll never do that again. You're everything to me. And suddenly hope returns, and maybe things actually improve for a while. They're kinder, more attentive, more affectionate. And you think, finally they understand. Then slowly the old behaviors return. They rear its ugly head. And that's why we have to remember something incredibly important. Promises are not patterns. Remorse and change are different. Someone can truly regret what happened. They feel bad, they feel sorry, they apologize, they say all the right things. But that doesn't necessarily mean that they are prepared to change. What that means is that real change requires more than feeling bad. It requires acknowledgement. I did this. It requires responsibility. This was my choice. It requires repair. How can I make this right? It requires action. Well, this is what I'm finally doing differently. And finally, consistency. Not for 3 days, not until the argument disappears, but over time, gradually, patiently. It takes time. Intermittent reinforcement can keep you attached. There is another reason leaving an unhealthy pattern can be so difficult. Well, we reason with it. Well, the relationship really wasn't that bad. Well, there were good days. There were good things. There were good conversations. There was affection. There was laughter. Then something painful happens, and then things improve again, and it's up and down, up and down, up and down. And that kind of unpredictability can make people cling tightly to the good moments that they hope will return. You start thinking, see, the person I love is still there. And you hold on to those moments as evidence that the permanent change is coming. But occasional patterns of kindness does not erase the repeated pattern of harm. You've invested so much. We view relationships like investments. Years and money and energy and memories and dreams and marriage and kids and maybe you've built an entire life together, and maybe walking away feels like all that you've invested in heavily. You can feel like admitting that all of that effort was wasted. I know, truthfully, there's times I feel like I've wasted energy and effort in the failed relationship that I had. But time invested does not automatically mean more time that should be invested. Sometimes the question should be, how much have I already put into this? The better question is, what is the relationship consistently producing now? You believe that loving them means never giving up. And some of us were taught real love never gives up. And there is something beautiful about that kind of commitment. Healthy relationships absolutely require perseverance, but commitment does not mean tolerating unlimited mistreatment. I'm going to say that again. Commitment does not mean tolerating unlimited mistreatment. You can love someone and still recognize that their behavior is unhealthy. You can forgive someone and still establish boundaries. And you can wait and want the best for someone and still decide that you cannot continue participating and allowing the same destructive cycle to control you. And sometimes faith gets mixed into it. Sometimes you'll hear, well, you just got to keep praying. You just got to keep believing. God's going to change them. You made a commitment. You got to forgive 70 times 7. Faith can give people tremendous strength. But faith should not require pretending that destructive behavior is healthy. Faith and reconciliation aren't identical. Reconciliation requires participation from both people. There must be honesty, there must be transparency, there must be safety, there must be responsibility and willingness to change. One person cannot rebuild the relationship by themselves. And, one person, it shouldn't be on that person's shoulders forever. This is another painful cycle. You think maybe they don't understand how badly this hurts me. So you explain again and again and again. You write longer messages, longer text messages. You choose different words. You talk to people. You wait for the perfect moment. And eventually you have to consider, what if the problem isn't that they don't understand? What if they understand more than enough but aren't willing to make the necessary change? And that is a very different problem. You blame yourself. Sometimes hope becomes attached to self-blame. Maybe if I'm more patient, maybe if I communicate better, maybe if I'm more affectionate, maybe if I stop upsetting them, maybe if I stop yelling or screaming or belittling them, or whatever the maybe may be, they'll change. Self-reflection is very healthy in relationships and in personalities. We should all examine ourselves. We should all examine our behaviors. We should all examine why we do things. But another adult's growth cannot depend entirely on you becoming perfect. You cannot love someone into accountability. So watch what happens after apology. So here's something very practical that anybody can do. Stop evaluating apologies based on emotion. Stop watching what happens. Start watching what happens, not when they say it, but what happens after they say it. Does behavior changes? Do they seek help? Do they respect boundaries? Do they become more honest? Do they accept responsibility without blaming you? Do they continue making changes when you're no longer threatening to leave? Because genuine change eventually becomes visible. Look for patterns, not moments. Anybody can have a good weekend, can buy flowers, can send great text messages, can apologize after realizing there may be consequences. Instead, ask, who have they consistently been over the last 6 months? Not yesterday, not during the honeymoon period, not during the best week of the relationship. Look at the pattern. Patterns tell stories that promises sometimes hide. Hope doesn't need evidence. You don't need to have to abandon hope, but you can make hope and accountable to the reality of life. Instead of saying, I hope they'll change, ask yourself the question, what evidence shows that change is actually happening? Are they taking responsibility? Are they getting the appropriate help? Are they respecting boundaries? Are they changing behavior? Are they consistent? That's the difference between hope-based promises and hope supported by evidence. You don't have to hate someone to move forward, and this is very important as well. Sometimes people believe that they must become angry enough to hate someone before they're allowed to leave an unhealthy situation. You don't. You can care about someone. You can remember beautiful moments. You can wish them well and still recognize that this relationship doesn't work and is unhealthy for me. Moving forward simply does not require hatred. Sometimes it requires acceptance. Grieve what you hoped it would become. Sometimes you're not grieving the person, you're grieving a future. You're grieving the marriage you imagined. You're grieving the family you wanted, the trips that you would take, the person you would hope that they would become. You grieve the life that you were building. That grief is real. Healing sometimes means grieving not only what happened, but what never happened. Turn hope toward yourself. So here's where conversation changes. For years, maybe you've been asking, will they change? Start asking, how can I change my life? Instead of asking how they'll become healthier, hope that you'll become stronger, that you'll become healthier. Start respecting your own self-worth. Start respecting your own intelligence and who you are, and start respecting yourself. Start respecting your values and what you value, not what other people value in you. Instead of waiting for them to recognize your worth, start recognizing it yourself. Instead of waiting for someone else to create your future, begin building one. So, Midwest Survivor, I want to leave you encouraged tonight. Hope is powerful, but hope needs wisdom, and hope needs patience and accountability and strength. Watch for consistency, and remember, you cannot build a healthy relationship with someone's potential. You cannot build a healthy relationship believing whenever the patterns are telling you something different. You have to make decisions based on the person that they consistently choose to be. Maybe they'll change, maybe they won't. But there's one person that can change. There's one person that can grow. There's one person that can get stronger. There's one person that can get healthier, and that is you. You can get healthier. You can get stronger. So, I want to leave you with a question. Have you ever found yourself holding on to someone's potential instead of looking at their patterns? What finally helped you see the difference? Share your thoughts in the comments, please. If you're comfortable, please. Someone is reading your comments. Someone is going through what you're going through right now, and they need to realize that they're not alone. So remember, don't spend your entire future waiting for someone else to become the person they kept promising they'll be. You deserve to be strong. You deserve to be healthy. You deserve to build a life based on what is real today, not only on what you hope might happen tomorrow. So, Midwest Survivor, be healthy, get strong, be strong, and remember, this isn't about surviving. This is about thriving. So, y'all take care, have a good evening, and stay safe.